Hi, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Kelsi Likes. I'm really excited. The premise of this show, if you guys tuned in to the last time I did it, is really talking about just anything at all that I like. That's the only criteria, basically, is that I enjoy it. And last time we talked about 90s Nickelodeon, but this time I'm super excited because we're talking about Seinfeld. And Seinfeld really is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. I've got a lot of favorites, but I gotta say that Seinfeld's definitely in the top three of my favorite TV shows, and I'm a really big TV buff. I work in the TV business, so it kind of makes sense that I like TV. So today we're going to discuss a whole bunch of things. Some things we're going to do is we're going to go through some polls that I put out on social media, and we're going to look at the results of those polls, all about Seinfeld, of course. We're going to also look at some Seinfeld merch, books. We're going to discuss some Seinfeld facts and trivia. I'm so excited to share this information with you. I have been researching so much in preparation of this episode. There's this book that I'll talk a lot about during this episode. It's called Seinfeldia, and I got through about half of it. I wish I could have finished it, but I just didn't have time. So fascinating. We'll get really in depth on some of the facts I learned from that book. And we'll talk about much more than just that. I'm going to share you guys' favorite episodes, and I'm going to give you my favorite episodes too. Also, I'll share your favorite quotes from Seinfeld, and I'll give you my favorite quotes from Seinfeld. So there'll be a lot of not only my opinions shared, but I'll be sharing your opinions too that you gave me on my Twitter and across social media platforms. So I'm really excited to get into it. First, let's talk a little bit about Seinfeld and what it means in terms of television history and kind of the monumentous feat it was at the time in the 90s. It helped change TV in the 90s, and we'll talk about why that is. So, again, this is Kelsi Likes Seinfeld, and thank you guys for tuning in. I really appreciate you, and I just can't wait to talk Seinfeld with all of you. Here we go. Okay, so even if Seinfeld wasn't your favorite show in the 90s, or if you never even cared to watch it at all, no one can really deny that Seinfeld has had a huge impact on social and television landscape. It played a huge role in television history, as I said a few minutes ago. It also played a role in academic television analysis and also in society itself, by becoming a massively influential cultural phenomenon. So really, just Seinfeld's such a big thing. In college, I wrote a paper, and it was about the evolution of television in the 90s, and one of the shows I talked extensively about in the paper was Seinfeld. So I'm going to read you a few quotes. I found my college paper. In case you're wondering, did I fail the paper? No, I got a decent grade on the paper. So I got an A. And one of the big parts of the paper was Seinfeld and its impact on society, and its impact, more importantly, on television as a whole in the 90s and going forward from the 90s to now. So first I quoted Entertainment Weekly, and I said, Entertainment Weekly describes Seinfeld as that brilliantly self-reflective series about a stand-up comic and his three pals, and it went on to become the defining sitcom for the 90s. In its 8 years on the air, Seinfeld changed the tone of TV, our Thursday night plans, the way we talk. It spawned enough imitators to fill Yankee Stadium, boosted sales of Juji Fruits and Banaka, and even made medical history. A journal reported that a Massachusetts man laughed so hard he kept fainting. It made a mint for NBC, and not a junior one either. Then I go on in the paper to say, breaking the idea of political correctness, Seinfeld addressed countless topics that had never been discussed on television before. Then I quoted, again, another article. Over the years, the quartet broke tube taboo after taboo, mocking deaf people, cancer, football-shaped goiters, and mental retardation. Even masturbation and oral sex slipped onto the airwaves, thinly disguised with masterful euphemisms. Not exactly safe, family-friendly, Tony Danza-type television, but it was precisely Seinfeld's shocking deviations from formula that separated it from the sea of tapioca. The show gave us a peek at our Jujian dark shadow. It let nothing, not feelings, not death, get in the way of a punchline. And that's one of my favorite things about Seinfeld personally. And then in the paper I go on and say, overall, Seinfeld was a step in the opposite direction of the regular family-friendly sitcoms such as The Cosby Show and Happy Days that had reigned in previous decades. This, however, is exactly why Seinfeld was able to develop and flourish. And the 90s television audience was left with a new type of comedy that has not since, one could argue, been matched in quality and content. So I think that's important to note that, a lot of people cite Seinfeld as such a big revolutionary venture in TV, including myself in my paper. So not only me, but lots of experts. I quoted Entertainment Weekly, and we'll see even more quotes later when I'm talking about the book that I read about this behind the scenes working of Seinfeld. That book quoted Business Week and TV Guide. Also, I've got some things that they said about the show. So lots of quotes happening on this show tonight. But either way, I'm super pumped up to share them with you. And I think you'll enjoy the show that I'm doing tonight, even if you didn't really like Seinfeld. I know one argument is that some people who don't like Seinfeld find that the humor is too dry for them. I find this to be really funny because I feel like Seinfeld is so absurd in some episodes. The plot lines and the character acting is so extreme sometimes, and some things that happen are just so outlandish, but that's what makes it so good, and that's what I enjoy about it the most. So even though people say it's dry, I really think, especially when you get into the later seasons, I'm talking about season 4 through 9, which is when it ended after the 9th season. So basically the second half of the show, to me, it really takes on a different life. A lot of people love the early seasons though, but those to me are more dry. So if you tried out Seinfeld in the early seasons and found you didn't like it, you might want to try the later seasons, because to me it's more about character acting and kind of the absurdity of everyday life and absurd situations and how the characters get into them and sometimes get out of them, but usually they're stuck in them. It's about how they deal with that, and I love that type of plot, and that's what later Seinfelds are all about. And you'll see when I start talking about my personal favorite Seinfeld episodes, you'll see that I kind of favor the later episodes. That's kind of what fills up my list personally. But I've got friends, such as my friend Trace. He likes the early episodes. I know that my co-host Paul, he really enjoys the early episodes as well, and we'll talk about that. So, we will first go through, I think what we're going to do is go through some more trivia. I think that'll be kind of cool to set the stage before we get into opinions like favorite episodes. We'll get into that shortly, but first I want to read some facts that I learned from the book. And man, there's so many good things that I had no idea about Seinfeld, and I'm a lifelong fan, and there's so much stuff I didn't know about. Okay, so here we go. And again, this is from the book Seinfeldia. By now, at the time of the book, it was in 2016 that this book was published, the show had been off the air for almost twice as long. Now it has been off the air for twice as long as it was on the air. And yet, it lives on like no other television series. It continues to bring in millions of dollars in syndication fees and advertising revenue every year. 3.1 billion total between its 1998 finale and 2014. In 2015, Hulu won an intense bidding war for rights to the show, offering a reported $160 million to bring it to a new generation of viewers. I think that's a testament enough to how much staying power that Seinfeld has as opposed to other comedies. I mean, I really can't think of another show that can generate that kind of revenue in syndication. The birth of the show is kind of interesting. If you guys like Curb Your Enthusiasm, of course, Larry David is behind that. He stars in that. But Larry David was also a key person in the creation of Seinfeld, of course. Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld are friends. And at the time, they were brainstorming together because Seinfeld had a meeting with NBC about a possible comedy special. Seinfeld didn't really have any ideas, and he thought that Larry David would be a great person to bounce ideas off of. So David and Seinfeld kind of met after one of their stand-up nights that they were doing at a comedy club, and they were discussing, what they were seeing when they were walking down the aisles at this market. It was called Lee's Market. So they were saying stuff like, why does Korean jelly have to come in a jelly form? Larry David said, this is the kind of discussion you don't see on TV. And then the early idea for the show was kind of taking shape right then and there. Then later, not long after that, both of them sat down at a diner together and was riffing off ideas for show possibilities, and they talked about ideas for a show that depicted where comics got their stand-up material. Jerry could play himself, and this is the idea that they then took to NBC, and NBC actually signed off on it and suggested that Jerry Seinfeld do a 90-minute special called Seinfeld's Stand-Up Diary that would air in place of Saturday Night Live during an off week. This obviously didn't happen. The further and further along Larry David and Seinfeld got, the more their script resembled the pilot of a sitcom, more so than a 90-minute throwaway special. So they decided, okay, let's develop this. And after the pilot aired, NBC, they liked it. Executives thought it was unique and different, and actually it got a lot of critical praise. However, the ratings weren't very good. But one particular executive at NBC convinced everyone else, okay, let's give this a small run. Let's pick it up and order 4 more episodes. So they didn't even order a full 13-episode season or anything at first. It was just 4 episodes after the pilot. So, Seinfeld was off to a rocky start, but not with the critics, because right away it was kind of popular with the critics, which is a theme throughout Seinfeld's history. It did relatively well with critical praise throughout its whole run. So, I think some things that set Seinfeld apart from other sitcoms is the look. And yes, it had a live studio audience because the network kind of demanded that it be filmed in front of a live studio audience. But the director that came on for the first few seasons, his name was Tom Sharonis, he wanted to make it look as unsitcom-like as possible. So he decided to keep the lighting lower and more natural than the normal glare of sitcoms. So he hired lighting experts, and he wanted to put less emphasis on multi-cameras and make it look more like a single-camera sitcom or single-camera show, which it really comes off looking like that. So I think he did a really great job at making the show seem a little more natural, I would say. Also, I really love the theme song. If you have ever heard the theme song, it's kind of a lot of beep and boops, boop, 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 boop. A lot of riffs and stuff. I just love the theme song. It's so catchy. And it's also very pliable. Like, you can change the length of the song, which was really important because at first, the show had Jerry's stand-up at the end and also the beginning as well. And so the theme song couldn't really override Jerry's stand-up. It had to kind of work along with it and around it. So the composer, Jonathan Wolff, he decided to use a strong bass line around Seinfeld's routine. And he was inspired to do this bass line because he thought that Seinfeld's delivery had a kind of rhythmic sound anyway. So he thought the bass would go kind of good with Seinfeld's voice. So basically, not only did he use bass lines, like I said, but he also was able to hold for punchlines and accenting gestures with the way he was doing it. He also produced a theme that included a beatboxing riff he produced with his own lips, tongue, and teeth. That's like the noises you hear, like ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. I can't even do it. I can't do it at all. That's a terrible impression of the Seinfeld noises, but you get the picture, basically. So, NBC executives, this is kind of interesting. This is about a specific episode. So Seinfeld, for a while, they didn't have too many restrictions, which was really rare for a sitcom. Seinfeld was really, really lucky in that I think they had people behind it from the very beginning. But something that people did question them on, when they produced the episode The Chinese Restaurant, that, if you guys aren't familiar with the episode takes place in one location, which was very unusual for a sitcom. I mean, sitcoms took place in houses, but they didn't take place at one singular location where nothing really happens. Basically, the whole premise of the episode is they're waiting for a table at a Chinese restaurant, and all this stuff ensues, And people were all confused. Even the director, Tom Sharonis, he was confused, like, what the hell is this episode? But he said to himself, okay, it doesn't matter what this actually is, I'm just going to go with it. And I'm just going to film it as best as I can and let the writers do what they do and let the actors do what they do. And the NBC execs actually, they had doubts about that script from the beginning. So they approached Jerry and Larry David and they said, guys, we would suggest you might think about doing a different episode instead of this. We're not sure how well this will play out with the audience and how well this will do ratings-wise and so on and so forth. But Larry David and Jerry were like, no, we want to do this episode and we're going to do it. And the NBC execs, yes, they voiced their concern, but they had enough faith in the show and in the people behind the show that they actually let Seinfeld and Larry David do what they wanted. So it ended up airing as was, and basically kind of the foundation for what Seinfeld was to become in tone and style. Pardon me. So as you saw in later episodes, there were more episodes that happened that took place in more than one location. Like the parking garage, another one just like that. So we're going to go through some more facts, but I thought that was interesting that the Chinese restaurant almost didn't take place, which really is just really funny. I had no idea that it was in jeopardy. So here we go. If you guys didn't know, this is kind of interesting. Larry David used a lot of things that happened in his own life for the show, for storylines, and then subsequent writers that joined the team writing for Seinfeld did the same thing. So many episodes of Seinfeld were based on real life stories. So if you guys remember the jacket episode where Jerry Seinfeld is wearing this nice jacket, but on the inside it has a ridiculous pinstripe pink pattern. And he was meeting Elaine's dad, who he didn't want to see the inside of the jacket. All of that story was based on Larry David's real life. He had an absurd jacket. His girlfriend, he was meeting his girlfriend's father, and he didn't want the father to see the inside of the jacket. So thus, he used his real life to base an episode on, and I think that's kind of fun. And I want to thank you guys who are joining right now. Really appreciate it. We're talking Seinfeld. If you guys are huge Seinfeld fans, shout out what you like and enjoy about the show, because we'll be sharing your opinions later on. Right now, we're talking about Seinfeld facts and trivia, which there are a ton of. Again, I'm quoting a lot of these facts from the book Seinfeldia, which was super interesting, goes very in-depth on the behind-the-scenes aspects of the show and how the show was made, and little tidbits that I never knew before. So a typical taping of Seinfeld would begin with about 200 people filing in and filling the bleachers of the live studio, which Seinfeld was filmed at. And basically at first, they were just random lucky people who the showrunners had to basically convince at first, because no one knew what the show was. They had to convince to attend the tapings. Later, of course, these tickets were highly sought after, but the book says that the tickets were always free no matter what, regardless of, the early seasons when no one knew it. Even later, when people were really wanting to go to these live tapings, the tickets were still free. So I found that to be really cool, and I didn't know. I would have guessed that they would have charged a pretty penny, but nope, they were free. So something that would happen before the show would be taped is there was a warm-up comedian to keep the audience entertained, and sometimes Seinfeld himself would come out and he chatted with the audience too. And a lot of the stand-up comedians that they brought in to warm up the audience, they said how hard it was to go on after Seinfeld was just even chatting with the audience, because he was so charismatic and such a good warm-up for the crowd that they had trouble following Seinfeld. So I found that to be interesting as well. For any off-site episodes, so anything that was filmed like outside on the streets or anywhere else, the directors and producers devised a system where they showed the footage that was shot off-site the next week in studio to a live studio audience, and then they recorded those live laughs. So if you watch Seinfeld, you'll be familiar with the laugh track, and it's not a phony laugh track. It's really people laughing at Seinfeld. But the cool thing is, think about how many times they probably had to do those scenes, and they had to do take after take after take. So the laughs weren't always clean when they were cutting between takes and between shots. So what they did have to do, although they didn't put in phony laughs or add any laughs, but they did have to devise a way to smooth out the laughs. So that kind of made editing a little harder for the sound engineer, but still it turned out great, and you really can't tell that the laughs had been altered in any way. Again, they were real laughs. They just had to smooth them out because, different laughs happening at different times, etc. So the network reps didn't really have a problem with anything in the original script for the contest. And if you guys are familiar with the contest, that is the episode where they talk about being master of their domain, thinly referencing masturbation, of course. And they were doing that on TV, which was unheard of at the time, as I quoted in my paper. It was really taboo, but they still addressed it anyway. And although the NBC execs had a problem with the Chinese restaurant, they didn't have any problem at all with the script for the contest. So at the table reading afterwards, the executive said, "You know what? This episode's perfect. Don't change a thing." I find that to be very funny because something as simple as the Chinese restaurant with nothing that could be considered controversial, that was a problem, but the contest was not. So really, it's really funny. We almost didn't get the Chinese episode, but the contest was never in danger of not airing. Something else that I found to be very interesting was, in the book, it talks about the show Friends, which a lot of people compare very closely to Seinfeld. And I do think that there are some similarities between the shows, but, the showrunner, specifically the creator of Friends, doesn't really like that comparison because he says, our show has emotion and characters that you can invest in, whereas Seinfeld, people traditionally think that those characters are horrible people. But as we come to see later, all kinds of viewers came to love the Seinfeld characters and actually get invested in one way or another. Yes, they had shoddy morals. Yes, they kind of said the things that we all are afraid to say. But I think that's what makes it so great. So to me, even though people said that the Seinfeld characters were bad, they still invested. Trust me. I still love the Seinfeld characters. I never think of them as evil people or anything. But yeah, the Friends guy, the Friends creator, didn't like the comparison between the two shows. And actually, NBC execs didn't like some things that Friends was trying to do. And they had more of a problem with Friends showing a condom wrapper than the contest episode of Seinfeld. So Friends, the episode of Friends, they wanted to show this condom, but NBC execs wouldn't let them. So I find that to be kind of funny. And in the book, it just says how ironic that is, that basically Seinfeld can do whatever it wants, but Friends had trouble doing other things like showing a condom. So I find that to be kind of a funny comparison. Cal Riot says News Radio is greater than Friends. I gotta agree with you. I'm not a big Friends fan, to tell you the truth. I really did like News Radio. I'd love to rewatch that show. Seinfeld, definitely greater than Friends. My good friend Take the Bump Pod is saying. I'm not a big fan of Friends. I'm really sorry. David Lagana, if you watch this at any point, I am sorry. Because I know you worked on Friends, but I'm not a huge fan. Sorry. So yeah, the contest, they had no problem with it, like I just said. Thank you, all of you guys who are viewing right now. I really appreciate it. Big Paws on a Pup is saying News Radio was great. Who knows, that could be a future episode of Kelsi Likes. But right now, we're talking Seinfeld, one of the most influential and greatest TV shows, literally, of all time, and definitely of the 90s, too, of course. So, some more things. I'm just reading some trivia quotes from the book Seinfeldia, like I've been saying. The character, if you guys remember, Crazy Joe Davola, he was named after a real guy. And the real guy didn't work at NBC. He actually became an executive at Fox. Of course, that was a rival network to NBC. And the funny thing is, when they named the character Joe Davola, they had to send the real Joe Davola the scripts for him to approve the use of his name. And not only did the actual guy have to approve the use of his name, but he had to pass it through the people at Fox, and they had to pass off on it too. So they all had to approve on the use of Joe Davola. And once they started calling him Crazy Joe Davola, he actually started getting some attention when he went out in public with his real name. And people, you would think that they would look at him in a bad way, but actually he was looked at and treated in a positive way, and actually got some favors done for him. Like, he would notice that he would get a table faster at a restaurant because of his name, etc., etc. I think that's kind of funny how just having the same name as a Seinfeld character got you some perks. And also, that's not the only real-life person that had a character named after them. There's a lot of people that had characters named after them. Let's talk about J. Peterman. J. Peterman not only was a real guy, but also had a real catalog that had ridiculous descriptions of clothes, just like in the show. So yes, it was a real business, but we'll talk more about that in a second. I'm going to read exactly what it says. So, J. Peterman, like I said, was a real person with a real catalog. And actually the actor who played him, John O'Hurley, got to be friends and did some press together for the show, funnily enough. But the thing is, the real J. Peterman tried to bank on the Seinfeld recognition, and he wanted to expand his business, so he decided to open stores across the nation. This, however, was a bad move, because although people liked that his business was referenced in Seinfeld. They didn't like it enough to actually go into his stores, and it, didn't really help his business grow any, let's say. So, because he tried to expand too much too quickly, he had to file for bankruptcy, and he listed debts of more than $14 million. $14 million of debt. That's insane to me. So yeah, it didn't work out for the real Jay Peterman, which is a shame because apparently he is also quite a character. And again, Larry David just constantly naming characters after real life people, and that kind of is a testament to how the whole show itself drew from real life. And then what's funny is, and this is why the book is called Seinfeldia, it's because the idea of Seinfeldia is that real life stuff influenced the show, and then the show, in a weird cycle and a weird turn of events, thus then influenced real life and became a part of culture and influenced culture itself. So not only did culture, of course, influence the show, but then vice versa, the show influenced and became a part of culture. Changed the way we talk, as I was referencing in my paper earlier. Just so many cool things about Seinfeld and its staying power. Really, it's a testament to why it's such a great show. Again, I don't know how they wrote some of the episodes. So clever, and some things weave so well in and out of each other. I don't know how they did it. I really don't. Another cool thing that I don't think gets enough attention is that, of course, Kramer was based on a real guy. The guy who Kramer's based off of, also named Kramer, same name, he lived across from Larry David. And they were kind of friends, actually. And they kind of walked in each other's apartment, just like Kramer busts into Jerry's apartment. And Kramer borrowed stuff from Larry David in real life. The real life Kramer, of course, I'm talking about. And then, but vice versa, unlike in the show, Jerry doesn't really borrow from Kramer, but Larry David in real life borrowed from the real life Kramer. Some things went and they shared groceries, I believe. Interesting stuff. But the real life Kramer still to this day does Seinfeld tours, just like in the show. This is what I was talking about. So real life influencing the show. Real life Kramer, this zany guy who had a lot of inventions and had an awesome name, influenced the creation of the character Kramer. And then, because the real life Kramer kind of tried to benefit off of that by creating tours, the actual show itself then spoofed what was happening in real life and did an episode where Kramer was doing tours because Jay Peterman used Kramer's life in the show and plotline to write a book about his life. So he stole Kramer's stories, and Kramer decided to do a real Jay Peterman tour where it was really based on Kramer's life. So again, real life mirrored in Seinfeld, then Seinfeld mirroring real life. It's all an endless cycle. It's really, really kind of fun, and it kind of blows your mind. It's like the 9 levels of separation. There's endless connections here, and that's what I love about the show. It's so great. So more trivia, and then we're going to get to opinions. I know this is a little long, but I found these things to be so fascinating, and I've been a fan of Seinfeld for, 20 years, 20 plus years, and I didn't know half of this stuff. So that's why when I was reading the book, I put little tabs, little marks on the book. Every other page, I was marking all over the book, and I only got halfway through. So I really think it was very interesting, and you could learn a lot if you bought the book. So like I said, Jay Peterman was based on a real guy. Another thing that was based on real life, Elaine's crazy dancing. So you know the episode The Little Kicks, where Elaine does the crazy... you can't see my feet, but my feet are doing it too. So she does the little thumbs and the little kicks, and everyone just can't stand her dancing. It's so awful to look at. So that dance was based on a real person. And the funny thing is, who was it based on? It was based on Lorne Michaels from Saturday Night Live. So Lorne Michaels, the creator of Saturday Night Live, he was at a party and he was dancing wildly. And who sees it but the receptionist at SNL at the time, who then later became a writer for Seinfeld. And I think this is so funny that it was actually based on Lorne Michaels, somebody that so many people respect and love. And so the receptionist, then turned Seinfeld writer, said he was really intimidated by Lorne Michaels when he first started working there. He idolized him, in fact, but after he saw him dance, he realized he was just another nerdy guy. And in fact, he even said about his dancing, the writer said, he saw Lorne Michaels dancing as if he'd never seen another human dance before. The man heaved and gyrated to a rhythm only he could feel. And then the writer, his name was Fernstein, he gave Julia Louis-Dreyfus, of course she played Elaine, he gave her dancing lessons before she filmed the episode so that she could get like the weird jerky movements right. So he kind of basically showed her Lorne Michaels dance. So yep, the Little Kicks isn't just a random made up dance, it's based on Lorne Michaels. I think that's really, really funny. So in the book it says Seinfeld commanded the commercial realm like no sitcom before it. By 1997, which was the second to last year it ran, it ended, of course, in 1998. So by 1997, Seinfeld had become the first TV show to bring in more than $1 million per minute of advertising. Something up. The money pouring in allowed NBC to plan for its Seinfeld-free future. It was able to invest in cable networks because of the money from Seinfeld. It was also able to invest in international markets and also long-term rights to broadcast the Olympics as well, all because of Seinfeld. And then Business Week said, Seinfeld is one of the most important shows in history. It is a TV super show, it said. Another example of the kind of big money that Seinfeld played around with, the episode The Rye, which is such a great episode. The budget for that episode itself came in at almost $1 million alone. Because of the large outdoor set that was needed for that particular episode, it was a lot they didn't usually film on, and it was at Paramount Studios, a lot usually reserved for filming movies. But yeah, they had this large outdoor set, they had fake snow, they had the handsome cab that Kraver drives in the episode, all that cost a lot of money. And the filming for that episode particularly took a lot of the night, and the cast was up almost the entire time, but they had a lot of fun. They actually had a fake snowball fight, it says in the book, during the filming of that episode. And another interesting fact is, and this is kind of well known, a lot of people know about this, George and the rest of the cast didn't really like the actress who played George's fiance, who later gets killed off in the show. Her name was Susan. The character's name is Susan. They didn't like the actress who played her. They liked her personally. They just didn't like her comedic timing. They thought her comedic timing was really weird, and they found it was hard to work with her. So they decided in the writer's room to kill her off. And as my mom said, she kind of had a weird problem. She didn't like that episode. She thought that Seinfeld almost went too far. It was a little extreme and very dark. And some people feel that way about that episode of Seinfeld where George's fiance, Susan, dies, and he basically doesn't seem to care hardly at all. But really, it didn't affect ratings, and the show just kept getting better and bigger, and people still loved the show after that. So clearly, it did not affect the Seinfeld faithful at all. So again, lots of interesting Seinfeld facts. That was my last little bit of trivia for that. I do have more trivia from IMDb that I will talk about later, but let's get to some opinions now, because there are plenty of great opinions, and I really loved hearing what you guys had to say. Of course, I have my own opinions, but you guys' opinions are just as good as mine, if not better, because, mine is just one person, it's just subjective, but so many unique, different perspectives when I get your takes on things. So let's start off with going through some of the polls. And the first poll I put out, these are all Seinfeld related, of course, and this first poll I did was, who's your favorite main character? And why, of course. So the main characters, of course, are Jerry, George, Elaine, and Kramer. And I was really surprised by this result. Out of over 200 votes, actually almost 300 votes, George won with 41% of the vote. I thought it would be hands down Kramer, who, spoiler alert, that's my favorite character because he's so zany and over the top, and he really does some great physical comedy throughout the run of the show. And if you know anything about comedy, physical comedy in particular takes a really big toll on the actor. Like, ask Chevy Chase. He did a lot of physical comedy, and it wears a person down, and it can be really quite dangerous in some cases. Chris Farley did a lot of physical comedy, and it just takes a toll on the body. And a lot of people said that Michael Richards, who played Kramer, actually was a really extreme guy. He would spend a lot of time between takes and between shows preparing for the role, preparing for the episode, and really just rehearsing his lines, trying to stay in character. So he didn't really bond with the rest of the cast like the other three actors did with each other. So there's been a lot of talk if you read a lot about Seinfeld, how Michael Richards was kind of on the outskirts, but when you see them all together, they all seem like they're close, so it doesn't look like he's out of place at all. But yeah, George won over Kramer, and that's what surprised me. Kramer did come in second, though, like I thought, with 30% of the vote. Jerry came in third, of course, and Elaine came in last, which I do find surprising because she's such a great addition. I think she's the hidden gem of the show, because if you take away Elaine, I feel like the show can't work, because you needed that female voice, but you also needed that successful character of the show, because the rest of the characters, George, Kramer, Jerry, they're all deadbeats kind of in a way. Not Jerry, of course, but Jerry has his own issues with, like, being too picky about women, and he's just, like, not a very good person. And neither is Elaine, really. She's got some problems, too. But she was the most, I think, besides Jerry, the most successful out of all the friends. And she had her life together in the most way. Although, of course, we see throughout a lot of episodes that she wasn't completely together, though. But yeah, that's y'all's favorite episodes as you voted in the poll, and we'll find out what you had to say about the characters and why you voted for who you voted for right now. So, the World Wrestling Facts Experience said, George had pathos and was acted to perfection. His timing, tonality, facial expressions. Jason Alexander just put on a masterclass of comedy with George. And I do agree with that. George is really such a great character, and Jason Alexander did a great job portraying him. I mean, it was a hard role to play. Actually, originally George based the role on Woody Allen. He came in and kind of auditioned with a Woody Allen type of persona, but then later he found out that the character of George is actually based on co-creator Larry David. So he started to observe Larry David's mannerisms and use that in his portrayal of George. And later he kind of put his own tone on George. He kind of got a feel for the character outside of Larry David and put his own notes on it, his own feel on it. Then we've got Brian at Brian St. Denny, good friend Brian. He's saying that Jerry's sneaker game is on point, he's funny, and I saw him live at the Beacon Theater, and Seinfeld is the greatest TV show ever. Gotta agree with you, it is probably the best TV show of all time. At Papo Bromans, this is actually a really tough question. I can't choose which is my favorite character. I know it was hard for me to choose two, but Kramer, just with the physical comedy, really, he's my favorite because of that. At Dr. KZVOSKY66, anything George is gold. Gold, Jerry, gold. Seinfeld quote there. Favorite is when he sleeps with the cleaning lady. Was that wrong? Should I not have done that? I gotta plead ignorance on this whole thing. If someone had said that to me, that sort of thing was frowned upon, and then he, the quote goes on, but he's just quoting that episode where he sleeps with the lady. Nicola 64777. For me, my favorite is Jerry. Jakenheimer, close call between Kramer and George. For me, had to go with Kramer, though. He's put me on my side too many times. Yeah, I know. I mean, Kramer's just incredible. The Crossover Podcast says, early seasons George, late seasons Elaine. When she started resenting the fact that those were her only friends, she was the funniest. Zach Dongan, the answer has to be George. There is no character in history like George Costanza, and that is true. He's literally one of a kind, and I guess that says a lot about Larry David. He's definitely a one-of-a-kind guy, too. At J. Mells, 1323, George was great, but Kramer made things interesting. I have to go Kramer. Again, I think it was a toss-up between George and Kramer. It's the hardest to choose between them. Crow T. Servo says, George, the situation he gets himself in are hilarious. It's even funnier when it's his own fault, like Festivus. Rick says, Jerry, he was the most subtle in his horribleness. I think that's a good one. And then he posted a gif of Jerry's going, that's a shame. And JD Hoop 702, my favorite is when Jerry is upset. His voice when he yells cracks me up because it gets really high pitched. I love that Jerry voice. And then of course we circle back to the beginning. So that was you guys' thoughts on which character of Seinfeld you like the best and why. I loved hearing your thoughts. Again, I said my favorite was Kramer, and for good reason. I think I love Kramer. He's one of the best, especially like I said, physical comedy. There's really no one better. And since we're talking about Kramer, let's talk about you guys' favorite Kramer subplot, because a lot of people put in their favorites for Kramer's silly antics and plot lines of particular episodes, and this is what you had to say. So the Grizz says, I love when Kramer hangs out at Jerry's apartment while he's out of town, and they go through a montage of Kramer rearranging things, imitating Jerry's act, and all sorts of things while Jerry is gone. And when Jerry gets back, everything is back in its place, and Kramer is asleep on the couch like nothing had happened. That is a great, great part of the episode. Dr. K, either the show or food prep, the shower food prep, where Kramer is literally in the shower washing off his food to prepare for a dinner, or he also likes when Kramer widens the road lanes. This is when Kramer adopts a road and basically paints over the middle lines to make the lanes wider and more luxurious, as he says. Then we've got at Mr. Dose 2, I loved when he adopted a mile, like we were just talking about, and when he went through the process of widening the lanes, the chaos that ensued, and the aftermath of him dumping paint thinner all over the road. That was great. Jim Cerny, I loved when he had his intern, Kramerica Industries. Oh my god, I can't speak today. I'm so sorry. Thank you guys, by the way, for hanging in here with me, and for watching. I really appreciate it. I love talking Seinfeld. So PC Hassler at PCH Nobog, my favorite Kramer episode is when he tries to shut down Kenny Rogers' chicken because the red light from the sign messed up his rods and cones, of course his eyes he's talking about. But when Newman, his friend Newman, gets him addicted to the chicken and he trades apartments with Jerry, every single time I gotta get Popeyes. Yeah, I love that. And then, Newman has to pretend like they're not getting chicken from Kenny Rogers Roasters. It's so good. They try to fool Jerry. Jerry starts going mad, like acting just like Kramer. Oh, I'm stressed. And that's exactly how he acts. It's awesome. Kelly Williams, Kramer and Newman borrowing a U.S. Postal Service van to take a truckload of returnable bottles and cans to Michigan. Love that episode. Greg with 2 G's, when he had the Chinese businessmen in the dresser, and then they got stuck because of the homemade sauna in Kramer's apartment. That one's a great episode. And then Mark says, when they think Kramer is mentally challenged because he had dental work, that one is a good episode. That's, I believe that's the Jimmy. That's one of my really most favorite episodes. At Bama_Stew, the one where he is hitting golf balls into the ocean. Is that a Titleist? He ends the episode by saying, and we'll talk more about that episode later. That's the marine biologist, of course. The Rev at Raw Mopar fan, when he fell asleep on his girlfriend and she had him thrown in the Hudson River in a sack. That is a great one. B. Wayne Richardson, when Jerry became Kramer and Kramer became Jerry, because of course, he's talking about the Kenny Rogers Chicken Roaster episode, which we referenced a little while ago. One of my favorite podcasts, the wrestling podcast about nothing at the WPAN, says, "You're Batman." Of course, that's a reference to the episode where Kramer saves one of Elaine's co-workers' pinky toe. And it's a whole long story, but it's a great episode. It's definitely one of my favorites, and there's this whole long monologue where Kramer discusses and describes how he saved her pinky toe. Basically, he found it, he tried to get on the bus, there was a robber on the bus, he tried to fend off the robber, kept making all the stops, and I can't do it justice, but the way Kramer, and thus Michael Richards, portrays the monologue and portrays Kramer, the way he does it is incredible. And then, Greetings from Allentown podcast says, without question, it's when Kramer puts the Merv Griffin show set in his apartment. That's gold. And then MDH says, when Kramer is trying to act hip and find out if Jerry's accountant is a cokehead, and he basically drinks a beer and smokes a cigar both at the same time. And I don't know how Michael Richards did that scene, but it's an incredible, incredible feat of acting, I gotta tell you. And again, we circle back to the beginning. So that was you guys' favorite Kramer episodes. I liked a lot of those. Kramer plot lines, so good. There's so many more that we can't even mention because there's just so many massive amounts of Kramer great bits and stories. You can't go through them all. Let's go back to the polls. Our second poll was, who's your favorite reoccurring supporting character and why? And of course, I couldn't fit everybody into the poll question. There's way more than I mentioned, but the ones I mentioned were Newman, Frank Costanza, Jay Peterman, and then I put other, and I told people to comment any other people that they wanted to shout out. Of course, you could have shouted out Jackie Childs, Putty. Lots of people shouted out Putty. Steinbrenner, all kinds of great reoccurring characters that I just couldn't fit. Out of 91 votes, Frank Costanza, of course, that's George's dad, played by Jerry Stiller, who is the father of, great actor and comedian, Ben Stiller, of course. So Jerry Stiller, his character won, Frank Costanza, with 51% of the vote, and then 31% of you voted for Newman, who's my favorite character. I just love Newman. Anything Newman is in is gold. Wayne Knight, who's the actor who played Newman, did a great job portraying him. In fact, he played him with such a weird evilness and an absurdity. That's why when people say that Seinfeld is dry, I don't understand how they can say it's dry. Because when you watch specifically Kramer and Newman act and what they do in their plot lines, it's just so over the top, out of this world, zany, but still somehow relatable. But again, it's not dry at all. It's over the top, in your face comedy, and a lot of it is physical, right there comedy. So I don't get the whole, oh, it's dry mentality, because to me, I just love it. And I just think it's the perfect tone for a sitcom. It's not phony, and even though there is a laugh track, it's a believable laugh track. Lots of people like Big Bang Theory. I was never really into that show too much, but that has a very obvious laugh track that I feel like is just kind of cemented in. It's just edited in post. It's not really live. At least it doesn't sound live. So to me, the Seinfeld laugh track, that it's done with real laughs, I think adds a lot of flavor to it. And again, I don't find it dry at all. Sandman29 is saying, "Hello, Newman." Of course, that's a great quote from Seinfeld. I love it. There's just so many good Seinfeld quotes. And again, actually, we'll talk about Seinfeld quotes in just a minute, because there's a lot of good quotes that I think people just should really love. And I'm going to shout out some of my favorite quotes actually right now. I'm going to give you my top list, and I'll put up, this is going to be called Kelsi's Countdown. So instead of spelled with a C, I'm going to spell it with a K. So these are my top picks for favorite quotes, and of course I've got a ton of honorable mentions, because I can never just whittle it down to a few for some reason. I'm terrible at choices. So here we go. Kelsi's Countdown on my favorite Seinfeld quotes. And I went with, most of them are very iconic quotes. I didn't really go off the beaten path until I got to my honorable mentions. Then I did zany ones that I love. But the iconic ones, my top list. Number 5, "No soup for you." The Soup Nazi episode, of course. 4, "These pretzels are making me thirsty." Number 3, favorite quote, "Serenity now." Number 2, "Hello, Newman." Of course, that's what Jerry says every time he sees his nemesis, Newman. And of course, number 1, I think a lot of people love this quote, "The sea was angry that day, my friends." It's this great monologue George does at the end of The Marine Biologist, and again, we're going to talk more about that episode coming up. And then, let me give you some of my honorable mentions. These are just ridiculous, some of them. Their great episode, The Wig Master, where at the end, Kramer is wearing the Technicolor Dreamcoat from the Broadway play, Joseph and the, Technicolor Dreamcoat. So he's wearing it, and he's wearing this weird hat, and he looks like a pimp. So he gets arrested because the police think he's a pimp, and he's posing for his mugshot at the end, and the police goes, "Turn, pimp!" And then Kramer goes, "I'm not a pimp!" So that's one of my favorites ever. Newman saying, "Jambalaya." I love that. That's Kenny Rogers Roasters, of course, the chicken roaster episode. "Get out!" That's Elaine's little shove where she says, "Get out." Then the muffin top episode, "Just pop the top and toss the stump." "You son of a bitch bastards." That's George, of course, where it's the hot tub episode where he's mingling with people from Texas and trying to entertain them, and they always call people sons of bees and bastards, and George kind of starts imitating the way they talk. Then Jerry and his girlfriend, "Schmoopy! No, you're Schmoopy! No, you're Schmoopy!" Yada, yada, yada is a great quote, and this one's a lesser-known quote right here. "Cable boy, what have you done to my little cable boy?" And that's Kramer who says that. George says, "I was in the pool." Another George quote, "Oh no, I'm so sorry. It's the moops." The correct answer is the moops. And of course, that is from the episode with the Bubble Boy. And Sandman is saying, "You're the ass man." That's a great quote too. Kramer says, "Here's to feeling good all the time." That's when he drinks the beer like I was referencing a few minutes ago, and he smokes the cigar at the exact same time. And then, of course, one of my favorite things of all time, and I had this as my alarm ringtone for a little while, it's George's answering machine message on one episode, and it's the Believe It or Not theme song, but he changes it to be about him. "Believe it or not, George isn't at home. Please leave a message at the beep. I must be out or I'd pick up the phone. Where could I be? Believe it or not, I'm not home." So yeah, that's George's message, and I love that flippin' message. I could play it all the time. Then this clown says to George, "You're living in the past, man. You're hung up on some clown from the 60s, man." Because George keeps talking about this old clown bozo. That's from the episode The Fire. Then we've got The Voice. This is a quote from that episode. "Well, hello, la la la," where Jerry is impersonating his girlfriend's belly button. It's a very weird storyline, but such a great voice. The double dip episode where George double dips a chip. A lot of people said they like the quote, "You just double dipped that chip." I like the quote, "Just take one dip and end it." That's my favorite quote of that episode. Then, of course, during the episode The Rye, Jerry says, "Shut up, you old bag," as he steals an old woman's rye. Jerry is called an anti-dentite by Kramer. "You're an anti-dentite." And then, of course, same episode, at the end, Mickey's father is criticizing Jerry and says, "If this wasn't my son's wedding day, I'd knock your teeth out, you anti-dentite bastard." So many good quotes. Oh my god, I love those so much. But again, my top 5, they were kind of, pretty iconic ones. "No Soup for You," "These Pretzels Are Making Me Thirsty," "Serenity Now," "Hello, Newman," and "The Sea Was Angry That Day, My Friends." Again, all standard stuff, but I really, really love all of them. So good. Big Paws on a Pump is shouting out, "Serenity Now!" I love that. Sandman is saying yada yada yada. Again, lots of favorites, and a lot of people have their personal favorites. There's just too many to name and to really narrow it down. If someone told me pick like just one, I couldn't. It's just too hard. So that actually brings me to the results of my third poll question on social media. I said, "What is your favorite Seinfeld quote?" And the choices were, "The jerk store called," and of course the rest of that quote is, "And they're running out of you." Then the second choice was yada yada yada. The third choice was "Serenity Now." And the fourth choice was other, because there's so many and I couldn't list them all. We had a lot of people submit other choices, but the thing that came in first was "Serenity Now." And I think that's just a testament to how much everyone loves Frank Costanza, the character, but also throughout the whole episode, Kramer says it a lot too, actually, and I love that episode so much. And a lot of you guys had some specific quotes you wanted to shout out, so let's go to your comments. Graham at Mr. Bagshaw said, "Newman." Of course, that's when Jerry kind of says Newman's name in a terrible tone because he's mad at Newman all the time. Motivated and Confident Bags at Deej Kirkby, our good friend Deej Kirkby. He says, "Moles, Freckles' ugly cousin." Great quote. Mike at RHPot92, "And you want to be my latex salesman?" I love that quote. Mark R says, Darren, if you would have told me 25 years ago that someday I'd be standing here about to solve the world's energy problems, I would have said you're crazy. Now let's push this giant ball of oil out the window." And that's from the episode The Voice. Such a great episode, oh my god. Hans Carpenter says, "I can't pick a George, they're all too good, so I'll dip into the Kramer pool. Brody is a reasonable man, but he's completely insane." And of course, that is from the Little Kicks episode when Jerry is forced to bootleg, like film a movie basically, to bootleg it with Kramer because of his friend Brody. Gary says, "These pretzels are making me thirsty." Take the Bump podcast says, "My favorite Seinfeld quote." George says, "They were all Twix, it was a setup." That is such a good one. Of course, that's from the later seasons, later episode with Putty, and such a good episode. World's Heavyweight Jeremy says, "It's not a lie." And the rest of that goes, "If you believe it." You double dipped the chip, of course. That's another popular one. Russell Bear says, "Yada, yada, yada." And that particular GIF, if you're watching on YouTube and Periscope right now, there's a GIF where it's George driving in the car. And this is when he says, "Yada, yada, yada," in such a demeaning, tone. He's so down in the dumps about it. He just goes, "Yada, yada, yada," because he's describing his parents and his relationship with his parents. So it's just particularly funny in that particular part of the episode when he says yada, yada, yada. Our good friend Dave Hancock at dhancock110, he says, "Not that there's anything wrong with that." One of the great Seinfeld quotes that I don't think gets enough love. My good friend Jay at Jayaletto, he says, "Mulva? Wait, no, Dolores." And that's when, of course, Jerry is trying to guess his girlfriend's name, who he doesn't know, and she had given him the hint that it rhymed with a female body part. So, of course, you can get the gist of where that's going there. Dave at sensei underscore Dave Bear, "It's a Festivus miracle." I love the Festivus episode, of course. My good friend Drew at Drew Ortman, spelled Ortman, he says, Kenny. And of course, this is when Kramer finds out that they shut down the Kenny Rogers Roasters across the street. At first, he wanted it to be shut down, but then he was upset because he got addicted to the chicken. Thanks, Drew. Great answer. Mark R. Is this guy a dentist or Caligula? And of course, he's talking about Tim Whatley, the dentist, who is played by Bryan Cranston. A lot of you guys might know him from Breaking Bad, of course, as Walter White. Yes, he guest starred on multiple episodes of Seinfeld, as did many celebrities, and, later well-known sitcom actors, a lot of them got their early guest appearances on Seinfeld. The actress who played Monica, she guest starred. Of course, I'm talking about Friends. She played Monica on Friends. She guest starred on Seinfeld, as did a lot of people on a lot of other sitcoms. Awesome stuff. Kelly Williams says, "Not that there's anything wrong with that." We've got our second mention of that quote. Sorestro of Mog, "The contest. I'm master of my domain." The Man's Fan, "Hello, la la la." Again, the voice of the belly button. Sean Ross, or a good friend, at Sean Ross Sapp, "It's 2-ply. If it's 2-ply, I'll take 1-ply." Of course, that's from the episode where Elaine is begging Jerry's girlfriend for a square. "Can you spare a square?" "I can't spare a square." So she wouldn't give Elaine any toilet paper. Tub, "A George divided against itself cannot stand." I love that episode. Squared Circle Company, "You're an anti-dentite." As I said earlier, such a great quote. Desmino, "The sea was angry that day, my friends, like an old man trying to send back soup in a deli." A lot of people love that quote, by the way. Mike says, "George likes his chicken spicy." That's from the Jimmy, where George starts talking like Jimmy and refers to himself in the third person the whole show. I love that. Jared said, "Yada, yada, yada." Andrew Zwicker said, "Yeah, well, the jerk store called and they're running out of you." One of George's great insults. Mike says, George calls Jerry. George rants about something. Jerry replies, "Who is this?" I just watched that. I believe that's from the episode The Nap, where George is stuck underneath his desk with Steinbrenner in the room. He can't leave, and he needs Jerry to help get him out of the situation. So he calls Jerry, because the phone's under the desk with him, and he says that he's stuck in this situation, and Jerry says, "Who is this?" Great episode, and great line, too. Wrestling Disasters says, "Pennypacker." AN says, "So many to pick from. No soup for you. Next!" I love that one. El Maximo says, "Ask the 8-ball," and that's a Putty quote, of course. Music for listeners, "These pretzels are making me thirsty." Again, another Serenity Now from DYWT$B. Spees in the Benchmark Show at Spees Benchmark, "No soup for you." Bodyslam.net at BodySlamNet, "The sea was angry that day, my friends, like an old man trying to send soup back at a deli." Is that a Titleist? And that's how it ends with Kramer saying that episode. I think it's one of the best of all time. Randy says, and this is at Undead Randy, worlds are colliding! And we're talking about the same episode where he says, a George divided against himself cannot stand. Such a good episode. Again, another jerk store from PC Hasler at PCH Nilbog. Louis Benitez, sweet fancy Moses. He says he uses that phrase pretty much every day. That's the only reference we have to sweet fancy Moses, but it really should have been mentioned more than that because it's so good. Jeff Springer said, hello, again at the voice. That's so popular for some reason. George's boss from Play Now. This is a favorite quote of David Fuller, said by George's boss at Play Now, I'll see you in hell, Costanza. Austin at Free Bird with a Y, 316. I'm out. And of course he's referencing Kramer when he's out of the contest after, he succumbed and he did not stay the master of his domain, of course. Crow T Servo, it's not a purse, it's European. And of course, we have a reference to the gonorrhea tractor story. I really love that part of that episode. So good. Jerry's girlfriend says that in the past she was convinced by her ex-boyfriend that she got gonorrhea from sitting on a tractor in her bathing suit. LAD at Icon Donaway says, Jambalaya! And of course, that's a Newman quote. That's one of my favorites. The Rev says, you got 3 pints of Kramer in ya, buddy. And then he pops his mouth at Jerry. Such a good one. No soup for you, says Jeff Manning. You want a piece of me? Referencing the Frank Costanza quote. The Rev is given another quote that he loves from Frank Costanza. Dylan Long says, she's bald, Jerry. And then Jerry says, bald? George says, bald! She's bald, Jerry. Bald. I was in the pool, Michael Marciano says. The Grizz says, are you serious? You would turn me in? What kind of person are you? Kramer says, what kind of person are you going around killing people? These pretzels are making me thirsty by Luke at Bren123Luke. And I believe that's all of our quotes. Like I said, the ultimate quote that won the poll was Serenity Now. And as you saw, a lot of people reference Serenity Now in their answers. They just really love that quote. And mostly it was spoken by Frank Costanza, but also was spoken in the episode by the character of Kramer. Again, I know this one's going long. Thank you guys if you are watching right now. I really appreciate it. Lots of Seinfeld information in a really long period of time, but it's actually a short period of time to go through 9 seasons of information and episodes and favorites. So much going on. And I will get to some of my friends' favorite episodes because I asked a select few group of people their favorites. I didn't want to just give mine. So a few favorites of, let's go to my friend Trace. And he is probably one of the biggest Seinfeld fans that I know. And he knows it almost better than anybody. And he's also a fan of Pez. And I think you'll see, the two things interconnect in his choices of favorite episodes. So let's go to Trace's favorites right here. And number 5 of Trace's favorites, the Junior Mint. And I think something that you'll see in Trace's picks is that he really enjoys early episodes, of course. And I understand that. It's just the early episodes are not my cup of tea, but hey, all the more power to you if you love the early episodes. The Junior Mint is from 1993, season 4. The Library is his number 4 favorite episode, and that is from 1991, season 3. His number 3 favorite episode is The Contest, as we referenced a lot during this episode. That aired in 1992 as a part of season 4. His number 2 favorite episode, the episode that almost didn't happen because the NBC execs weren't too into it, The Chinese Restaurant. It aired in 1991, and that was a part of season 2. And his number 1 favorite, again, like I said, he's a big fan of Pez, and he's a big fan of Seinfeld, so the two intersect in the episode The Pez Dispenser, which aired in 1992, season 3, and that is Trace's number 1 favorite Seinfeld episode. And yes, it's a great episode. Elaine cracks up laughing during George's girlfriend's piano recital because Jerry puts a Pez dispenser on her chair and she just cannot hold it together, and her laughing distracts George's girlfriend and she tries to find out who it is, and she later discovers it was Elaine, and things devolve from there and everything crazy happens, and I just love that so much. Great choices, Trace. Again, you could see a very common theme between his favorite episodes. They kind of all were between 91 and 92, with one of his favorites airing in 93, which was the Junior Mint. That's the latest episode he chose as part of his top favorites. He also said an honorable mention would be The Airport, which is another early episode from 1992, season 4. And Trace's favorite quotes would be, number 5, the sea was angry that day, my friend, like an old man trying to send soup back at a deli. Number 4 favorite, they're real and they're spectacular. Of course, nobody said that was their favorite quote, so that's our first mention of that quote. Very good, Trace. And this is another favorite quote of mine, number 3, that's gold, Jerry, gold. Of course, that's when Banya is saying Seinfeld's Ovaltine joke is gold and great. He says, the jar is round, the tin is round, why don't they call it roundtine? Why, it's not oval. Why are they calling it Ovaltine? So that's the gist. I'm not doing it justice, but that's the gist of that quote there. Number 2, giddy up. Of course, Kramer always says giddy up. And number 1, Boostros, golly. I always mispronounce that quote for some reason. But yes, that's Trace's number 1 favorite quote. Very good choices, Trace. I really loved all of those. And not only did I get Trace's favorite episodes, but I also got my co-host Paul's favorite episodes. Again, very similar to me, to Trace's. There's some later episodes from later seasons in Paul's picks, but a lot of them are early episodes. So let's start off with his number 5 favorite episodes, The Parking Garage, which aired in season 3 in 1991. Number 4 favorite, The Boyfriend, also airing in season 3 in 1991. That one is great because it's got Keith Hernandez in it, and it's when Newman and Kramer kind of recreate the scene from JFK about how they think Keith Hernandez spit on them, and Jerry disproves it because it couldn't be from the angle that they were hit with the spit with. It had to have been 2 spitters. So again, that whole little spoof of JFK, so well done, and we'll hear more about that later because some of my listeners and people on social media said that was their favorite too. Paul's favorite 3rd episode, The Chinese Restaurant, just like Trace, he loves that episode. That, of course, as I said, aired in season 2 in 1991. Paul's number 2 favorite episode, The Chicken Roaster, as we've been talking about. Lots of people love that episode. It's a later episode airing in season 8 in 1996. And his first episode, the number 1 episode for Paul, The Betrayal. And a lot of people know this as the backwards episode, the episode of Seinfeld that kind of airs in reverse order. And I love this episode. I think it's so creative and well done. And that aired, of course, in Seinfeld's final season, season 9 in 1997. Great choices, Paul. Really, really good. And he did not give me a list of his favorite quotes, but good choices on episodes nonetheless. Again, I want to thank you guys for watching if you stuck with me for this long. We were going kind of long here, but there's so much to say, and I did all this research, so I'm going to keep going for a little bit longer, if you guys will bear with me. So again, great episodes by all my friends, and another person I asked whose favorite episodes, I asked for my dad's favorite episodes, and he had a ton to say. Let me find, he wrote out, this is my dad's answers. My dad typed me 4 pages of flippin' notes on Seinfeld, because he really loves Seinfeld. So, my dad said, it's hard to pick, a favorite because there's so many great ones. Even the least funny episodes of Seinfeld each have some comedic gems within them. It's too broad and subjective a question without allowing for some subcategories. So my dad, he used subcategories. And let me say that one of his subcategories was favorite guest stars. And he told me he really wanted me to read the favorite guest stars thing. So I was like, okay, Dad, I'll read that. So again, these are picks from my dad, his favorite episodes. Number 1, he loves The Library, which is an episode from season 3. That was one of his favorite guest appearances by Philip Baker Hall, who played the library cop. He says his favorite quote from the episode is, "What's my problem? Punks like you, that's my problem, and you better not screw up again, Seinfeld, because if you do, I'll be all over you like a pit bull on a poodle." Of course, I botched that. I'm getting a little tired here. My dad's second favorite episode. Oh my god. My dad's second favorite episode, The Maestro Season 7. He loved it because it's a two-parter. He also loved the appearance of shady lawyer Jackie Chiles. Great lines by Jackie Chiles all the time. He also loved the spoof of the O.J. Simpson trial defense. So that was some of his favorite parts there. Number 3, he loves The English Patient, Season 8. The best episode quote, you think you're better than me? Says 80-year-old Izzy Mendelbaum, played by Lloyd Bridges. And then he also says, Izzy makes another appearance later in the Blood episode, which ends with Jerry unwillingly getting a transfusion in a hospital courtesy of his archenemy Newman. Other great Izzy one-liners, my dad says, it's go time, and welcome aboard the pain train. So yeah, my dad really loves that. And he also loves any episode with Putty. Joe Anthony Myrick says he saw one episode of Seinfeld. He didn't like it. Should he give it another shot? Yes, especially if the episode you saw of Seinfeld was an earlier episode. I feel like the show really hits its stride in the 4th season and beyond. And then it gets better and better. And the characters just... they become so evolved, and the actors just know their characters backwards and forwards, and they really almost become one with the characters. And I feel like because of that, I think that Seinfeld just gets better as the seasons go on. So I would say give it another chance for sure, especially if you saw the early seasons, because to me personally, I love the later seasons. Especially people who say it's too dry, as we've been talking about this whole episode. Anyone who says Seinfeld is dry, they might not have seen the later, more absurd episodes, which I love. So my dad also says he has favorites for each of the lead characters. His favorite Jerry episode, it's hard to choose from 180 shows because that's how many episodes Seinfeld was a part of, but he's saying that he might like the puffy shirt the best. Then he says his favorite George episodes, it's a 3-way tie between the marine biologist, the opposite, and the I was in the pool Hamptons episode in season 5. In fact, all of those episodes are from season 5. His favorite Elaine episode is the Bizarro Jerry and the Little Kicks, both season 8. And his favorite Kramer, any and all of Kramer's appearances since the Seinfeld pilot. There were only 2 episodes in which Kramer did not turn up, the Chinese restaurant and the pen. If I had to choose one favorite, probably it would be the Merv Griffin Show season 9. Then any of the episodes that feature a Kramerica Industries venture, for example, the NYU intern assisted oil bladder system. That's shown, we talked about this earlier, during the episode The Voice in season 9. And also, my dad enjoys the other various Eureka ideas that Kramer has, like make your own pie pizza restaurant, or his PB&J's sandwich shop, the coffee table book about coffee tables, the beach smelling cologne, ketchup and mustard in the same bottle, and the aforementioned male brassiere twist. And also, he said the reimagining of a future Kramer car periscope invention, the rollout tie dispenser. And then he says he likes Kramerica Industries more than Vandelay Industries, because that's, of course, George's fake business and fake thing. My dad likes Kramer's stuff better. And my dad says, hardly a day goes by in my life that doesn't include an occurrence or interaction within it that I can somehow relate it to a Seinfeld episode. Guess that does it for all my picks. Gotta go watch some Seinfeld reruns. It never gets old. Kinda like watching the movie Jaws. So Kelsi likes, you're gonna need a bigger list. And then he said, LOL. Thanks, Dad. Those are great picks. I love getting a different perspective because a lot of my perspective comes from, obviously a different generation, and my dad gives me a whole nother perspective, and really, he's somebody who introduced me to Seinfeld, so I love hearing his thoughts, and actually, he said a lot more and had a lot of other favorites I just don't have time to read, so I will post a blog with my dad's full answers if you guys are interested. I'm also going to post a blog summarizing what I talked about in this episode, as well as a lot of recommendations and links of Seinfeld-themed merch, books, articles, etc. So look out for that. That'll be posted right after I finish going live very soon. Again, thank you guys if you're just joining. We're talking all about Seinfeld. And the reason we're talking about Seinfeld is because I love it. It's one of my favorite shows, and I thought it would be fun to share some trivia and some interesting tidbits and so on and so forth. So, again, we've gone through my favorite quotes, we've gone through your favorite quotes. We've gone through some favorite episodes of my friends like Trace and Paul. We also went through my dad's favorite episodes. And now I think, though, we should go through some other things. Like, I guess it's time for me to give my countdown of favorite episodes, which was really difficult for me to do. And in preparation for this show, I actually watched about 30 episodes of Seinfeld. I was rewatching a whole bunch. It was difficult. I wish I could have rewatched more, but it's so hard to narrow down my favorites. I mean, it's almost impossible. But here it is, Kelsi's countdown, with a K, of course, of my favorite episodes of Seinfeld. All right, so number 5, The Rye. And that was a 1996 episode which aired as a part of season 7. The description from IMDb says, after George's parents take back the bread they gifted to Susan's parents, George makes Jerry find another loaf and tries to appease Susan's parents by taking them on Kramer's Manhattan horse tours to disastrous consequences. And I love the IMDb descriptions, that's why I'm saying them, because they're so concise and pardon me, they give a funny little summary of the episode. No description can really encapsulate what a Seinfeld episode is about, but it's funny to read these descriptions and how they try to summarize it the best that they can. So my number 4 favorite episode, we've referenced this in this episode, The Little Kicks, 1996, season 8. Description from IMDb, Jerry is forced to bootleg a movie for Kramer's friend. George tries the bad boy image to impress a girl. No one has the heart to tell Elaine that she's a terrible dancer. Again, we referenced that the dancing she does is based on the real-life dance of Lorne Michaels, creator of course, Saturday Night Live. My number 3 favorite episode, The Soup Nazi. A very, very popular episode, but upon rewatching it, it's justified that it's so well loved because, I mean, it's great from beginning to end, in my opinion. That, of course, aired in 1995 as a part of season 7. The description from IMDb says, a soup stand owner obsesses about his customers' ordering procedure, but his soup is so good that people line up down the block for it anyway. And, of course, chaos ensues with the 4 main characters. My number 2 favorite episode might be surprising to you guys, The Briss. And of course, that aired in 1993, season 5. The description from Halo 1K on IMDb, Jerry and Elaine get asked to be the godparents for their friend's newborn baby. But unfortunately, the position doesn't last very long when Elaine hires a drunken rabbi to perform the bris. While at the hospital, and this is my favorite part of the episode, Kramer thinks he found a pig man, while a mental patient jumps to his death and lands on George's car. So, the part I love about the episode is the pig man. It's a pig man, Jerry, a pig! It's just so great. Kramer has so many absurd lines in that episode, and that's why, for me, personally, it's one of the most absurd episodes of all of Seinfeld, and that's why it's my number 1. So, my number 2. My number 1 is The Chicken Roaster, which aired in 1996, season 8. Lots of people reference this episode. It was one of Paul's favorite episodes, and the description from Halo 1K on IMDb says, Kenny Rogers Roasters sets up shop across the street from Jerry and Kramer's apartment. Unfortunately, their unusually large chicken sign causes problems for everybody. Kramer and Jerry wind up switching apartments because of it, and they switch personalities too. So again, I feel like those are wonderful episodes, and those are my top 5. Also, a random note, some of my favorite bits of episodes and my favorite scenes are when Jerry Stiller and Michael Richards, of course Frank Costanza and Kramer, are in scenes together and they're working together in the same scene. So to me, there's so many great episodes with them two interacting, like the Bro or the Manzier episode, the pool episode where Kramer's playing pool with Frank in their really small pool billiard room. That's so great. There's just so many great little instances and interactions between the two of those characters, and those actors are just top notch. I also made a list of my most underrated episodes. I feel like these don't get enough love. Number 3, The Jimmy. We talked about this earlier, 1995. It aired, and it was a part of season 6. The description says, Elaine dates a man whose habit of speaking in third person causes a wide array of confusion. George is blamed for the theft of Yankees sports equipment and more. And some of my favorite quotes in the episode, George is getting upset. George likes his chicken spicy. So just some good George quotes there. My number 2 most underrated episode, The Gum, airing in 1995 as a part of season 7. IMDb description by Jim says, when Lloyd Braun comes back from the psychiatric hospital, Kramer takes him under his wing and convinces Jerry to buy gum from him and wear glasses that don't belong to him to prove that Lloyd isn't crazy. George tries to prove to his old neighbor Deanna that he isn't crazy after a cashier shortchanges him. And then as the episode goes on, George seems more and more crazy. And then number 1 most underrated episode, The Hot Tub, also airing in 1995 as a part of season 7, just like The Gum. The Hot Tub, my favorite parts of this episode have to do with George acting stressed and annoyed and Kramer buying a hot tub, but it breaks and it's hilarious when Kramer can't get his body temperature back up. So the IMDb description says, Wilhelm thinks George is cracking under the pressure of working in the big leagues, so he has George entertain a group of visiting baseball officials from Houston who are in New York to discuss interleague play. George picks up a bad habit from them, who call everyone either a bastard or a son of a bee. And again, I love it because my coworker and I quote it all the time. We're always going, you son of a bee, bastard. At work, we always say that to each other. And also, someone on my Twitter said that the episode The Doll was underrated, and that episode was also from season 7, airing in 1996. So again, season 7 to me has some hidden gems, for sure. And then honorable mentions, The Boyfriend, as we talked about with the JFK spoof, The Calzone, the IMDb description, George gets Steinbrenner hooked on eggplant calzones from a local Italian restaurant, but George gets banned from the restaurant when he's accused of stealing from the tip jar. Then number 3, honorable mention, The Voice. Of course, we've been quoting that all along, where Jerry is kind of imitating his girlfriend's stomach and going, hello, la, la, la. And my number 4 honorable mention, the Andrea Doria, where this is what the IMDb description says by Halo 1K. A shipwrecked survivor beats George out of an apartment, so he decides to tell the apartment board the astonishing tales of George Costanza, which are very sad and pathetic. Elaine dates a guy who has had a series of really bad breakups. Kramer gets a nagging cough and seeks veterinary advice. Jerry learns that Newman is up for a transfer to Hawaii and tries to help him deliver mail to get that transfer. And of course, my favorite part of the episode is Kramer and this dog have the same cough, and that's why Kramer goes to a vet to try to figure out what's wrong with him. There's great scenes between Kramer and Jerry where Kramer basically is acting like a dog the whole episode. It's so funny, and to me it's one of Jerry Seinfeld's best episodes acting-wise because it's just so over the top and funny. And my last honorable mention would be the Yada Yada Yada. That aired in 1997 as a part of season 8. The description from IMDb says, George's new girlfriend keeps including yada yada in her stories. Jerry is offended by Tim Watley's Jewish jokes. Elaine tries to help her friends adopt a baby. Kramer and Mickey fight over 2 women. And again, I love this one. It's the anti-dentite episode. It's the I've yada yada sex. It's the quote, I believe Watley converted to Judaism purely for the jokes. And then again, I said one of my favorite quotes was Mickey's dad saying, if this wasn't my son's wedding day, I'd knock your teeth out, you anti-dentite bastard. He says that to Jerry at the end of the episode. And quickly, my best Newman episodes, really any episode that Newman is in is great, but The Boyfriend, as I mentioned, with the JFK spoof, the barber, where Newman is at the barber shop and he's acting like a barber and he's dancing around to like classical music. It's so good. The Pothole, which is where Newman's mail truck catches on fire because of the paint thinner that Kramer spilled over the highway, and Newman says, oh, the humanity, which no one said is their favorite quote. I found really crazy that no one said that. And it's such a great episode. Also, the lip reader, which is when Newman comes in and he says, I hear you've got a lip reader working for you, Jerry. You gotta let me use her for one day, just one day. Jerry says, can't do it, Newman. Newman says, "But Jerry, we've got this new supervisor down at the post office. He's working behind this glass. I know they're talking about me. They're going to transfer me. I know it. 2 hours. Give me 2 hours." Jerry says, "Not gonna happen." Newman says, all right, you go ahead. You go ahead and keep it secret. But you remember this. When you control the mail, you control information." And again, that's one of the best Seinfeld quotes of all time. I say Seinfeld as in Seinfeld, any episode quote. It's by Newman, though. It's spoken by Newman. Such great, episodes. It's so hard to choose for me. But again, those were my choices. Really, really tough. And let's go through our last poll, and then we'll be wrapping up. I know this is going super long. Thank you to all who have joined. We're talking Seinfeld. It's been a lot of fun. No love for the dealership. No, that's not my favorite episode, Take the Bump Pod. I'm sorry. I just really like a lot of the other episodes better. I mean, Putty was not my favorite. So how important was Seinfeld to New York? Well, a lot of New Yorkers really love Seinfeld, but at the same time, some of them kind of, it really depends on who you talk to, because I've heard the opposite, that like some people in New York didn't even pay attention to the show, because there's this one instance I read in the book where the actors who played Jerry, George, Kramer, and Elaine, they all got together in real life and had lunch outside in public in New York, and no one stopped to say anything to them. They thought they were going to get like hounded. They thought that people were going to be passing by saying, "Oh my God, can you believe it? It's the actors from Seinfeld all actually having lunch together in real life. It's not a part of the TV show." But nobody stopped except for like a homeless guy to ask for money. So I think that's kind of funny. Yes, a lot of people say that for New York, it's a very important show because it kind of represented what it was like to live in New York. But at the same time, there was those people who were there who didn't pay attention to it. So really, it depends on who you talk to overall. And I know someone's asking me what are my thoughts on the finale. Some people don't like the finale. I do, because at least they were able to get a lot of the guest stars back. There's a lot of little nods to Seinfeld throughout its whole course, its whole run. They did a lot of quotes, they did a lot of referencing back to old things, and they brought Larry David back for the finale because he actually left the show at the end of season 7. So to me, Larry David coming back was a good sign, and I know there's people who have mixed feelings about the finale. I, however, love it. So let's go to our final poll. And that is, what is your favorite Seinfeld food bit? And this might be kind of random to you guys, but I love that Seinfeld references so many different food items and drink items. It's so weird. I didn't realize how many food items were referenced until I found this article, which literally lists all of the food referenced on Seinfeld, and it chronicles which episodes that the food is referenced in. And I'll clue you to that in a little while. I'll tell you where to find that article. But as far as the poll goes, the choices I gave were, okay, so what's your favorite food bit? The Junior Mint, the soup, of course, that's a reference to the Soup Nazi episode, the Pez from the Pez dispenser, or other, because there's so many others, like I said. There's the Marble Rye, there's the Eclair in the trash that George eats, there's the Big Salad, the Kenny Rogers chicken, of course, the fat-free frozen yogurt, the Ovaltine references, the Bosco references, the Muffin Tops, cereal, of course, because Seinfeld loves cereal, it's always in his apartment, Snapple, the characters are constantly drinking Snapple, many, many more food references, like we said, Junior Mints is in the poll here, but what won was the soup, of course, no soup for you, very popular quote, and that won with 63% of the vote, just under 100 votes. Second place, the Junior Mint. Third place, other. A lot of people had other things to say. And fourth place, last place, unfortunately, Pez. So my friend Trace will not be happy that that came in last. But still, a little fun, little food, little tidbits there. I love all that stuff. And where you can find the article about all the different food references, which I love, and I have a link to this in the blog that I will post later tonight. I recommend this article. It's called An Exhaustively Complete Food Tour of Seinfeld, and you could find that at flavorwire.com. Again, I will put up the link as a part of my blog post later. The blog post is ready to go. All I need to do is post it as soon as this live video ends. And again, this goes through like so many different food items from Seinfeld. It even talks about the sandwich that George eats while he's in bed with his girlfriend. It literally covers everything. Of course, we didn't mention the black and white cookie. There's so many different little food items. I can't even remember half of them. All right, so now let's get to you guys' favorite episodes before we wrap it up here. And we're going to start with Michael, who says, he had a hard time deciding, but he said he finally decided on the opposite episode as his favorite. George is his favorite character, and it was nice to see him be successful for once by ignoring all of his instincts and going with the opposite. Also, as a kid, Michael thought that Kramer's coffee table book, which turns into a coffee table, was the coolest thing ever. I actually, as a kid, also thought it was the coolest thing ever. My good friends, Heels and Quads at Heels and Quads says, "Come on, Kelsi, I love them all. I'll go with The Boyfriend. It's a two-parter, co-starring Keith Hernandez, former New York Met, and he befriends Jerry, dates Elaine, and needs help moving. And then the elaborate scenario between he, Kramer, and Newman is done in movie quality." And Tommy, I agree with you 100% there. That is such a good episode. So funny, the JFK spoof. Andrew at Phantom Lord 87. He loves the parking garage episode. Jason Alexander, of course he plays George, legit laughing in the back seat at the end of the episode when the car wouldn't start, made the episode even better. Jake says the Van Buren Boys. That's a great episode. Irie, I-R-I-E, says loved when George and Jerry go to California. Favorite episode. At Take the Bump Pod, our good friend, Take the Bump Podcast. Episode 167, and this is the episode that he said I wasn't giving any love to. The Dealership. It's got the hilarious George Twix bar side plot and Putty. What's not to love? Yep, I know, you love Putty, Take the Bump Pod, and it is a good episode. I will say that. It's a great episode. Crow T. Servo says Elaine dancing. Of course, that's the Little Kicks episode. Mike says, I'd have to say the one where Kramer finds the set of the Merv Griffin show in the dumpster. Kenny Rogers Roasters is a close second. Again, I love Kenny Rogers Roasters. That's on my favorite list. Michael, at the beginning, before he knew his episode was the opposite, that was his favorite, before he decided, he said, there's so many, so difficult, and he put a gif of Jackie Chiles saying, it's outrageous, egregious, preposterous, because he couldn't choose. Later, of course, he did make the choice of the opposite. Dave says, episode where Kramer gets the vanity license plate that says Ass Man. And I really do love that episode. Matthew says, I was in the pool. I was in the pool. Of course, George talking about his shrinkage. That's a great episode. And that takes place in the Hamptons. At Ish Kababi, I think that's what it says. Is it too obvious to say the marine biologist? No, it's not too obvious. That's a great episode with a great monologue at the end by George, of course, talking about the whale, how he saved the whale, and how a golf ball that Kramer, it turns out, is the one who shot it into the ocean, into the whale's blowhole in the end. But George saves the whale. Jax says, episode 154, The Millennium. I just rewatched this episode, so good. Jerry with the speed dial problems, George tries to get fired from the Yankees. Kramer and Newman plan rivaling Millennium New Year's Eve parties, and Elaine's customer service issues with the Cinco de Mayo and other store that she's trying to put out of business. Then we've got Jeff Springer. We all know the big ones, but I'm going to go with a underrated gem, The Doll. And that's when Susan, George's fiance, has a doll that looks just like George's mother, and it freaks him out. One of my favorite podcasts, the Big Orange Couch podcast at BOC Podcast, said, always loved the comeback and the gum episodes. And then we talked about how the comeback, not so much the comeback, but the gum was underrated. And he said yes. And that episode comes to such a great crescendo, and the insanity story of George is such a great storyline, one of the best of all of Seinfeld. But again, not a lot of people talk about that episode at all. The Grizz says, what an awful question to ask. Ridiculously difficult. Probably the opposite is my favorite because I identify with George, and it's good to see him come out on the winning side after living with his parents and just overall failing life for the first 4 seasons. That's a great reasoning there. James Rankin says, the backwards one, of course, that's the betrayal. That's one of Paul's favorite episodes, too. It will always be one of James's favorite episodes as well, because it was, and still is, such a unique way to format an episode. And I agree. I really wonder how they filmed it and how they wrote it, because it's just so perfectly done. Even Kramer's lollipop goes from like eaten to reverse order. It's full again. He's like carrying around this huge lollipop. I love that. PC Hasler at PCH Nilbog says, I don't remember if I already answered, but the Red Menace, and of course I believe he's talking about the Kenny Rogers Roasters episode, best Kramer episode in my opinion, and I think I fell in love with Newman in that episode. To this day, I still say vile weed when I talk about broccoli. Jeff Cross says, the Soup Nazi episode was one of the funniest episodes ever in my opinion. Heels and Quads, they posted a gif, of course, from the JFK episode, which is their favorite, of Kramer getting hit with the spit. I love that part of the episode. Michael Johnson says, the first episode I ever saw was the Cigar Store Indian, so I'll go with that one as my favorite. I think I referenced a few minutes ago, Big Orange Couch talked about the gum and how it was a wonderful episode, and George's insanity storyline is one of the best of all of the Seinfeld episodes. And again, that brings us to the beginning of our answers. We go around to the beginning. And now let's talk about my recommendations for merch and such. Okay, so I referenced trivia, and most of the trivia came from the Seinfeld book, Seinfeldia. I would highly recommend this book. I had so much fun reading it, and I'm not even done. Imagine how long the show would be if I had read the whole book. I am getting sure tired here, and I am about to wrap up this episode, don't you guys worry. It is getting very long, but I'm going to assure you that it'll be worth it, because I think I gave a decent amount of information in this episode, and I think I gave, some things that I'm hoping you didn't already know about Seinfeld, because the book itself is what really taught me things that I had no idea about, and I think Seinfeld's such a special show, and I'm really happy to be a fan and happy to have this opportunity to talk about it. Thank you guys for joining me. I'm also going to recommend, if you're a wrestling fan, but also a Seinfeld fan, check out my favorite podcast that's wrestling related, the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing. You can find them on Twitter at the WPAN. Their show is obviously named after Seinfeld. That's why it's called the Wrestling Podcast About Nothing, because Seinfeld is essentially the show about nothing. And I think it's a very clever, a clever show name. And they also have a little intro that has Seinfeld sound bites in it, and I love that as well. I think it's so well done. Again, check out that episode. Check out that podcast if you love wrestling, but also Seinfeld. Then I recommend getting the complete series on DVD, because the bonus features of Seinfeld on the DVDs are incredible. Hours and hours of entertaining information. You could just spend many, many nights watching that DVD collection. Then I didn't get to read any of these facts about Seinfeld from this article, but check out the article. I'll have a link to it on my blog post. It's 48 classic facts about Seinfeld from Fascinate.com. Again, I will have the link to that later. And then this awesome Seinfeld trivia book, which I own. They pose a whole bunch of trivia questions, and they have the answers at the end of the book. I think that's a lot of fun if you just want to test yourself on your Seinfeld knowledge. Then I'm recommending another article, and this one's from ScreenRant.com. 15 minor Seinfeld characters who stole the show every time. That's a good read. Again, I will provide the link in my blog. And then this book about Festivus, which, again, Seinfeld drew from real life, and Festivus was actually something observed in one of the writer's families as he was growing up. It wasn't as absurd as it's portrayed in the show, but there's a lot of similarities to the real-life tradition of this writer's family. He did have a holiday they called Festivus, and this book talks all about that holiday, and it's called Festivus, the book, and it's a lot of fun. I own that book as well. And then we've got another article I'll recommend, and this one's from 22words.com. It's 40 of the best Seinfeld quotes that fans still use today, and it's just basically a list of quotes, and it's got pictures too. I really liked that article a lot. And then I'm going to recommend these dolls, and these are great. They're Seinfeld Funko vinyl idols, and there's 6 of them available, but some of them you can't get anymore. There's Kramer, Putty, Newman, the Soup Nazi, Frank Costanza with the Festivus pole, and Jay Peterman. And I'm going to cut to me really quick to show you that I actually have all of them except Putty, but the only one I have with me is the Soup Nazi, and they're great. They come with a little circular stand. The rest of them are at my parents' house, and I love them. Priscilla says she celebrates Festivus. Festivus is such a fun holiday, and I really love it. I love the idea of it, and I think it's so fun, and the book's really interesting, like I said. But yeah, check out these awesome little vinyl figures. Again, it's made by Funko, and I'll provide the link in my blog. Next thing I recommend is this article from RollingStone.com. Again, this is a big website, and it's called From Soup Nazis to Nuts, 100 Best Seinfeld Characters, and it goes through the top 100 ranking that they did of the characters, and there's a little description underneath each and why they chose them. I liked that article as well. And again, that is my last recommendation. I know it's a lot, but I really appreciate you guys sticking with me to the end. Something that I want to wrap up the show with. My friend Trace really said it perfectly. I asked him, why do you think Seinfeld is loved, and why is it so important in television history? Why is it such a great show, and why do you love it, Trace? And since he's one of the biggest Seinfeld lovers that I know, I really want to close out the show by reading his answer, because I think it's so well said, and it's really, I agree with everything he said, and it's just perfectly said. My friend Trace said, Seinfeld is well written and witty. The scenarios the characters found themselves in were absurd yet relatable. Who hasn't lost their car in a parking garage or struggled with someone who is a close talker? The terms seeped into our public consciousness, and decades after its debut, the show is still relevant as ever. When I discovered Jerry Seinfeld, simply put, his poke at little things made me laugh. My enjoyment of his comedy made me want to check out his new show. Seinfeld's core characters weren't written to be likable, yet proved to be enduring, and ironically, quite likable, as we talked about earlier. Trace says, my 15 and 14-year-old nephews have only recently discovered Seinfeld through syndication and laugh out loud, as I did when I first watched the episodes during their original run, and dozens of times since. It was billed as a show about nothing, yet became a show about anything and everything, and remains my favorite show of all time. No matter when I tune in, be it a few minutes in, or only with a few minutes left, I watch and laugh and yell out the lines and yada 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 all over again. Perfect, Trace, perfect, and I think that's a perfect bookend to this very long conversation, almost flipping 2 hours. What am I thinking? Thank you guys for sticking with me. I appreciate it. I think my next Kelsi Likes will be a lot shorter. It will be about 90s kids movies. So, thank you so much for sticking with me. Please share with your friends if they're Seinfeld lovers, and tweet at me at SuperKickinIt and let me know your favorite Seinfeld episodes if I didn't already include them in the show. And you can find me on social media at SuperKickingIt, SuperKickingIt. Also go to my website, superkickingit.com, to find a link to my blog, which I'll have a blog post about this very thing, about Seinfeld. It'll have all the links for the things I recommended, and it'll have a summary, and it'll be a lot better to read the summary versus hearing me stumble along as I'm tired and getting really hoarse, but you'll be able to read it in a very succinct way versus hearing me talk about it. But I think, the video version's fun because you get to see the graphics and you get to see all these people's responses, but the written version's good too. So my website, superkickingit.com, has all of those links, and it has links to my podcast feed as well as my wrestling podcast feed, which I do have a wrestling podcast. That's on Wrestling Inc. You can find us on social media if you're into wrestling at Two Faced Pod. But again, I'm at SuperKickingIt, and that's with a G. So SuperKickingIt, SuperKickingIt, yada yada yada. That's it for me. See you guys. Thank you so much. Good night.